We're here today with the TAG CRM CX Society, and we're going to do things a little differently. I'm going to pause my share for a second so you can see my face. There we go. So effectively today, we're going to try out a virtual webinar. We will be going through some questions to talk about how experience design has shifted during the crisis and through recovery, and we'll be chatting about some of our favorite examples. Before we dive in, I wanted to just talk a little bit about TAG for those of y'all who may not be as familiar. And also give a little disclaimer. So give us some grace today. We're doing this for the first time and we may have random dogs or people come in. We'll try to avoid that, but that's just the world we're in right now. And so thank you and bear with us and we're also gonna try to not talk over each other, but we'll give it a go. And we're looking forward to being able to do something during all of this for you guys. So let's dive in. I'm gonna share my screen again. Okay. Can you guys see my PowerPoint panelist?
Yes.
All right. So we are one of the societies within the Technology Association of Georgia. And just for those of you guys who are not as familiar, TAG's mission is to connect, promote, influence, and educate Georgia's tech ecosystem. And as a society, what we do is put on events. And we today are trying to do it a little differently and do a live webinar. Our society sponsors are Magenic and Jabian Consulting. And we thank them for being our sponsors and helping us get this first webinar up and going. All right, so what we're gonna do now, just so you guys can recognize faces as we're talking, is give a little intro around the fake room about the folks that'll be talking with you today. And just, today our panelists are board members and friends. So there are some select members of our board and some of our coworkers that we brought on to participate in this discussion. I'll go last, but JD, could you please give an intro about yourself and then we'll go through?
Sure. Thank you, Lydia. So my name's JD Dickerson. I am vice chair of the CX Society here and partner with Lydia to help make these things happen. My official role is I'm an account executive for Magenic, which is a software developer. I've been in the IT space now for about 8 or 9 years, started off in staffing, working with some of the biggest companies in Georgia like Home Depot and Mercedes, and got excited about solving business problems and moved over into the consulting world where I am now. So that's me.
Hi there, guys. Thank you for that, Lydia and JD. My name is Marcus Stallworth. I am a consultant with Jabian Consulting as well. And I've on the board, I help out with event programming and brainstorming about different things to bring to you guys that we will go over this next year. As far as work-wise, I've bounced all around from the Intel space to the federal and defense space. And nonprofit and now corporate space, doing everything from enterprise architecture to customer experience and data. So that's a little bit about my background and what I'll bring to the table today.
Awesome. Thanks, Marcus. What about you, Kim?
Hi, I'm Kim Ozment with Macquarium. We're a customer experience consultancy. We have expertise at the intersection of experience management, technology, and experience design. And I'm glad to be here.
Great. Happy to have you. Kristen.
Yes, I'm Kristen O'Neill. I'm with Toolbox number 9. We are a front-end user experience, user interface design and development shop. And I've been in technology and SaaS for a long time. So that's what I'm bringing to the table.
Great. Yeah, I think you're located down by Krog Street, right? I used to live right next door.
Yep, we have offices right there in Studioplex by Krog Street. It's an awesome location.
Yeah, that's really fun. Asa?
Hi, everybody. I'm Asa Sherrill. I'm our Vice President of Experience Design at Macquarium. And Kim kind of gave you the high-level view of what Macquarium does. What I and my team do we're really oriented around creating experiences. A lot of those tend to be online, but as you might have noticed, we dropped the user from that as we're going to talk about experience design. And that's intentional because people experience companies and brands through a lot more than just digital. my career has been spent a lot of time dealing with just the marketing side of digital marketing, and in the past sort of 5 to 10 years, really bled more into digital product design. So now we like to look at the full experience ecosystem. So that's what we do.
Great. And I was telling Kim, I'm so happy she brought you on, that I enjoyed your talk at CX Talks.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, excited to have you. Deven.
Hey everybody, Deven Rayjada, consultant with Jabian Consulting. Where to begin? Started my career marketing strategy, focused primarily on the digital space. Have a huge passion for just advocating for customers regardless of what project is happening on the management consulting side.
Great. Thanks, Deven. And James, last but not least.
Yeah, I'm James, who is one of the board members. So I run a boutique IT consulting company. It's focusing on the CRM, CX, and IT strategy by leveraging my past experience in implementing contact centers, lead management tools, and customer 360 solutions. So I'm very glad to join the panel discussion.
Thanks, James. All right, and I'm Lydia Slotten. I am one of the chairs for the CRM and CX Society, and I help lead the CX offering design at Jabian. And I will be helping moderate our discussion today with all these great speakers. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I'm going to pop back on a little bit with a slide so I can see your faces. There we go. This is more fun when I can see you. So today I wanted to give a little intro about what we're going to talk about, and then I'll pull back up the slide on design thinking in a second. But I want to kind of set the stage on what this webinar will be about. So well, we were thinking about what would be good for a first sort of live chat with everyone. We realized that one of the things that companies are really doing right now is pivoting and adapting and evolving their products, services, policies. And to do so, they're having to do things in like a very sort of fun, different way and working quickly. And so we are going to talk a little bit about that, and I'll be asking some questions of the board on ways they're seeing companies do this, how they're seeing companies do this, great examples. And I did want to say before we kind of kick off on a more somber note, you know, we get really excited about this as a topic as experienced design makers. So we're going to get like excited and cheerful. But we do recognize this is sort of like a very hard crisis, and people have been, you know, directly impacted by this in really tough ways. And so we wanted to just acknowledge that before we dive into more. So we're so sorry if you and people you know have been sort of personally impacted. And I know as companies, we're all going through really hard things. And so we'll talk about that a little bit, but did just want to give that couch. We're going to smiley because we love experience design, but this is like a very hard time and a hard thing that we're solving for right now. All right. The other question is, and I'm seeing some come through, as we're going to get going, I'm going to direct you to, at the bottom of your screens, if you sort of mouse over the bar, there's a Q&A button. And if you click that, you can actually enter questions. And then when we get to a good pace with this, we'll pause and flip over to answering those. So feel free to ask along the way. It won't interrupt us. And then we'll be able to go in and read what you're writing and answer some questions. All right, so let's dive in here. So the first question I wanted to ask you guys is, and maybe start with you, Asa. What does design thinking mean to you? And I'll pull up a slide in a second with some of the core sections of it. But for you, like, why is that important? And what is the benefit of it, like at a high level?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Yeah, and that's probably a good question. I think that I've encountered that as kind of a loaded term, and I'm sure some other people may have a different way they would characterize it. But when I think about design thinking, really what it is about thinking. It's about thinking about when you're making something, in this case, experiences, you're making that from the point of view of the end consumer, the user, what have you, right? And I'll draw a distinction there because I think that we all think that we do that. But the reality is that, you know, we tend to have an inside out view of those experiences, right? Especially if you live within those experiences, you're involved in making them. you may not really be making, you may end up making them for yourselves, right? So really what we try to do with experience design is try to produce that outside-in understanding of experiences. So we want to understand how people are going through those experiences. You know, part of that too, it's about, you know, training yourself not to rely on your personal or anecdotal experiences, although those are certainly relevant, but they're not everybody. We're not all alike. And then kind of cascading from there, design thinking also encompasses a lot of tools and techniques for doing that. But that's pretty much it in a nutshell for my view.
Awesome, thanks. And Deven, I know we were talking about this before earlier. You know, for you, what are the most sort of important parts of it that you see, you know, being relevant today?
Yeah, well, basically hit on the outside in point of view, I think is kind of the main piece to it. Understanding that if you think about it as a whole, it's designing with, not for. So trying to understand what it is that your customers are looking for, trying to understand what it is that, if you are talking about users or you're talking about customer in the broad sense, right? That can be somebody that you're selling to. It can be an employee within an organization. It can be a team that your output goes to do something else within your company as well. But just thinking about what it is that they care about, what are the needs that they have, and then how can you help to meet those needs? Finding those small moments of delight, you know, as you move through the process and taking away barriers. That's kind of the main concept, and that's really what I think about when I think about it.
Yeah, and for those of y'all that aren't familiar with the phrase and the term we're using, there's a, you know, concept of starting with empathy and thinking of your end user is part of this official flow of what design thinking is as far as stages. And so the idea is you develop a deep understanding of the challenge by empathizing initially with the person that you're trying to solve something for. And then you clearly articulate the problem that you want to solve. And you might say something like, how might we do blah? And so it's sort of open-ended, but you're clearly articulating something really specific. And then I'll let you guys read over these other pieces, but then you want to ideate, prototype, and test. And the idea is that you want to adjust quickly and continue to lean on the end user or end person that you are solving this for to prototype and have them actually test out what you are, whether it's an MVP that's backstage or something live that you're pushing out. Really, how do you iterate that and continue to take into consideration their reactions? So I'll stop sharing now, but I just want to make sure we're all grounded in that same phrase. And so I guess I'm wondering what you guys are thinking would be today. How do you empathize differently? Like, and how would you say companies can start to, if you maybe have like sort of standard segments that a CX person might use, what might be the way that you would sort of approach this differently today?
I'll dive in first. I'll start. I'll break the ice. How about that? Yeah, actually, this is an interesting question because I think it's kind of it's wrought with problems when we look at something like coronavirus, right? So normally, now there's always a truism, right? Your archetypes and your personas are inevitably going to change over time, right? So a lot of people will stay the same, but new ones will introduce, especially if you look at like generations and things like that. There's new sort of value needs showing up in the market all the time. So ideally you have a program and it doesn't have to be fast, right? You know, maybe you're revisiting every year or so, right? But you know, what happens within the span of 2 months where things change very dramatically? From when I look at that, you know, I think about it as the value that people want to consume also changes very dramatically. So kind of when I was thinking about this question, where I might start is, don't go all the way back to your archetypes or personas. I think there is a time where you can go update those. Really what I would think about is how quickly can you collect insight from your customers, and maybe rather than sort of taking them all the way to that persona or archetype, really you're just looking for collections of new needs and wants, right? You know, and what you should be paying attention to might be obviously what those needs and wants, but also what is the volume and frequency of those, right? So it's not necessarily important that those belong to segment 4 or whatever you call that, but it's that there's a need now emerging in the market that you have something to react to. So how do you speed that up, I think, is the important question.
Mm. Yeah, and how do you, if you're speeding that up, do you use data you already have? Do you sort of lay your own intuition on top of it? How do you do things in a faster way? I mean, I know, Deven, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's an interesting way to get some data, fresh data that you might not have, or get an understanding of what's changed so quickly. Part of that is looping in different parts of the organization and being a little bit more cross-functional. So your sales and customer service folks might have they might have new insight based off of conversations they've had with customers or complaints that are coming in or anything like that. So you'll start to hear some of these trends. You might see something that says, hey, last year we had, this quality issue and a few things were coming back and some customers were concerned, a lot weren't. Well, has that picked up? Has that gone down? Has that sentiment changed, right? So you can look back and say, we knew some of these things were happening. Is it happening faster? Is it slowing down? What are the new challenges that we're facing? What are we hearing from our folks? And I would say that in an environment like this, that's probably the best place to start. Going to a customer or going to a group of customers might be more difficult. Setting up focus groups and sending out surveys and things like that might not be front of mind for a lot of your customers that are trying to, figure out what they need to do. How do they stay safe? How do they keep their businesses running? Those types of things. But at the same time, if they are still engaging with your organization or anything like that, how can you pull that information out and have some of those conversations through your sales folks and your CSRs?
Yeah, I would jump on the back of that as well and say, from a sales standpoint, it's really tough right now, right? Because we're really doing a lot of listening, right? Because the customers' needs are changing and they're changing at a rapid pace, and we need to really hone in with those customers on what their pain is and what their new pain is and how we can help them design new experiences for their customers and our customers, right? And how we might help them impact in a positive way. I see a lot of companies. I'm moved by the levels of empathy that I'm seeing out there from companies at the moment, right? Like, so there's two sides of that. So for Delta, right, they're not really servicing their existing customers right now because nobody's flying. However, they decided that, well, they'd help the community, right, and donate 200,000 pounds of food, right, to the community in need, which I think is huge. And I think also from like the Atlanta Hawks, right, they set up a pop-up food grocery stores, right, in the neighborhoods that are needing food, which is another sort of community-based empathy pivot in their business. But from the other perspective is like Chick-fil-A, I've noticed, has not only changed the way they're doing business, and they're always a top leader in customer experience, right, and serving their customers at a really impressive level. They've redesigned their business for curbside pickup, and interestingly, they've accelerated their digital tools, right, to be able to do that, to order online and drive up and get your order to go at the curbside. So they're doing rapid acceleration of some of their digital transformation and innovative thinking on how we serve our customers, right? Yeah, so I think that they're using the design thinking and specifically in how can we solve our customers' pain right now, and doing a lot of listening and gathering those insights from having conversations, right? And less maybe from surveys, but really getting to know your customers one-on-one.
Yeah, another example is there's a client I was involved is approached me is the call center. So they have a lot of challenges in the call volume and also the complexity of the issues the customers talk about. So that impact the most of the call center metrics, for example, like average handling time. So it's take longer time, and also the first call resolution. So some of the issues not able to resolve in the first place. They have to transfer that into the level 2, level 3 to resolve that. That takes a longer time. But as a consequence, obviously the service costs will be up, and also the customer experience is getting worse. So how to improve this is especially at this special moment One is still keep the cost, and second is we continue to improve our customer experience. So there are couple of things I get involved by working with their companies. The first thing is identify what is the trend, what is the current trend, what is the theme as the customers talk about, by assess all the recordings, just search for some of keywords, get the CX professionals get involved so that we can put a right scripts for the call center agents. And also we can rearrange some of the IVR, that is interactive voice response. So make sure we are able to address some issues more specific, is more relevant to our customers. The last one is as a closed loop, we continue to monitor the record the agents' conversations to make sure they can stick with the scripts and deliver consistent messages to the customer.
That's so interesting. So part of that, what I was hearing was both the measures, like the way you've been measuring things may have very different metrics right now. And so it's like, one, what do those influence and how do you adjust them maybe to influence different things? And then two, if you are seeing things spike or additional cost, how do you adjust that? And so how do you understand why there's spikes, or how could you reduce those? What are things that can be helped with more online information versus the call center? And then I think you were saying too that you're listening to almost understand like sentiment and trends that way from what people are talking about just in their normal calls versus having to do a new survey.
That's correct.
That's really interesting. And Kim, you brought up a good point too, that the way that products and services, like the problem people were trying to solve, you were saying like the segment or the archetype of who Delta could serve right now was actually pushing the community up and revamping that way, which I thought was interesting. Have you guys seen other sort of product and services adjusted to make things for the community or to give back in different ways?
I've seen an example that kind of ties in a couple of things that we've talked about. I've seen an organization, they're not here in Georgia, but when they started to have less throughput in sales and business, they redeployed their portion of their staff to close the loop and call up current customers to do a deeper level of engagement, and then use that as a data source to kind of do some pivots. So they stand up every other day, calls to go review what is being said in those calls, what data points or need points that their folks are having, and then using that to then pilot out different new services based off of those follow-up calls and using those redeployed team members. So I thought that was a really cool way to not only show folks that you care, because they lead that conversation with, hey, I just want to understand, how are you doing? What are some of your needs? And different things like that. But then listening intently and then tracking in a very structured way some of those different needs that they hear come up. And then just layering that back into their processes and their services. And in some cases, just recalling an existing service, something new that speaks more directly to the needs that they're hearing in those follow-up calls.
Yeah, I think that's important too. I think you bring up a good point when it comes to just I feel like staying in almost constant contact with your customers at this point is just going to be so key, because we touched on, and I know, Kim, I think you touched on it too, how everyone's feelings evolve through this time. I feel like everything changes so fast. Like, I know we did a call and we, had a list of topics that we thought were relevant. And by the time we jumped on the phone a week later, it seemed like a year ago that we had talked about that stuff. And at that point, it seemed like there were just a whole list of new things that we were worried about. And I think that's the climate that we're in, is that our customers have never changed as quickly, just almost day to day, as we are during this right now. So that's a trend that I've been seeing, is businesses just, and again, you have to be sensitive because everybody's worried right now and everyone has their priorities. But I think the more you can talk to your customers about what they're worried about, and the more you can stay on top of it, the better at this point.
Yeah, I agree. Our CX leaders over at Macquarium, they're getting a lot of questions about, yes, tell me the theory, but really we need a playbook, right? We need tools and tactics on how we can shift and pivot and change our thinking and change the way we're servicing customers. So I think that type of advice is going a long way.
I think that's that, I think there's the data collection piece, but I think the ability to pivot it's an interesting one. There's a couple companies that obviously we've been looking at some companies trying to see what they've been doing. I'll contrast two companies that I think are pretty renowned for their customer experience. One is Chewy. I get my dog food through there. They've been beat up, right? So they have their call center is just swamped. They screwed up an auto ship for me. And without hesitation, they sent me something else for free, right? So I thought it was interesting how quickly they're able to adapt to the situation, right? So I don't have any problems. They screwed up some stuff for me, but they explained it and fixed it very quickly. Another one that has really struggled, I think, or just momentarily, is USAA. I don't know if you guys caught in the news recently, but they were garnishing stimulus checks out of people's accounts. And I call that out specifically, one, because USAA is fairly renowned for their good customer service, right? Good customer experience. But I kind of feel like they were caught a little bit off guard. A normal service that they provide would be, if you have a checking account with USAA, they're going to pull stuff out of there if you have outstanding loans. So that was an example where I'm sure they heard it through their call center, and then they definitely changed it as that story started to hit the news, right? Is making people very angry for obvious reasons. And I look at USAA, who was like, you guys are pretty good, but are you fast enough, right? And I think that's part of the challenge, right? They've got all the information, they've got a lot of precision archetypes, but who knew that this one service that already probably annoys people would blow up so quickly, right?
Yeah.
It changes the time frame of reactivity. What used to be a 2-month turnaround that might have felt very fast needs to be done in a week. So how are you sort of readying your company to address that? I think is a big question.
I think there's sorry, I was gonna say, I think there's a timeline component to that as well. If you think about it possibly in a pendulum, if we were on one side in the past couple months, we've swung all the way over from a customer experience perspective of things need to happen very quickly. Sentiment has changed very quickly. What customers are looking for might be very different than what they were looking for a couple months ago. If we think about long-term impacts, how much of that are we going to go back to where we were? How much of that are we going to stay where we are today? And are we going even further in certain directions because of certain needs and how things are changed? So there's an absolute need to act today, to think about, here's what we're learning, here's how we can help today. But I do think there's a need, and a lot of clients and customers aren't really necessarily thinking about tomorrow when we get there, what do we need to do to be prepared? How do we get ourselves ready and move not only short term, but also prepare ourselves for a long-term shift?
Yeah, this is Swami here. Hey, everyone. I didn't get an opportunity to introduce myself earlier, but going on exactly what Kristen had mentioned earlier, and now Deven, what you said, when we think about from a timeline perspective, there's currently this crisis mode that we are all in. And then there's this mode where there's going to be a relaxation, but it's going to be very cautious. We're not going to go back to the new normal yet. And then there's a new normal, right? And they're all at different points in time that these events are going to happen. So our reaction that organizations have to do, right, has to really be taking that into account, right? I mean, you'll make some changes that are needed for right now, some changes that are needed for more of the short term, and some for the long term. And in one of the examples that I have is also with Usaa, as a company that's has 2,500 agents that are call center agents that are working from home. One of the interesting things that they've done is, just as we've talked about the community and our customers, employees are working from home. They're challenged with having to take care of kids, of family members. Maybe some of them are sick. So they've taken the effort to use their workforce management tool to make shifts more flexible. So they've given line managers more flexibility in rearranging their shifts. in allowing people to swap shifts out easily and change a lot of the policies around. So they're trying very hard to kind of support their employees so that they can in turn take care of their own families, but then also be available to help their customers.
Hey, Swami, share what your company name is.
Yeah, I was sorry, Swami, you didn't get you in the intro. Can you give a brief info?
That's fine. I'm Swami Ganapathy. I've been on the TAG CRM CX board now for about 4 years, and certainly it's been exciting to have Lydia, you lead the team here for us over the last year or so. I'm with a company called SPAR Solutions, and we really focus on helping customers in their digital journey, transformation journey in the CRM space. And we partner with Salesforce.com and Verint and work with implementing those solutions for sales and marketing and customer service teams.
Thanks, Swami.
Thank you.
And yeah, I love your point, and I wonder, what of these things are going to stick? Like, what digital changes that are happening today will people just expect now moving forward? We talked a little bit about the sort of more obvious, like restaurant pickup from the curbside, and I can now pay my favorite local Holy Taco restaurant on my phone and then just go grab it. And like, is that going to stay? And there's other examples of that. But what do you guys think will stick around from a digital perspective?
I heard a really interesting example the other day, which I've never thought of before. And it's still, I'm not sure it's going to rapidly take yet with customers, but it's the idea of it came from a company called Usaa. They're down in Atlanta Tech Village, and they pair babysitters with families. And so they are in an effort right now to make babysitting virtual, and kind of pivoting their whole model. Now, this isn't going to work for someone like me that has a 2-year-old that's doing backflips everywhere. Like, that's not going to work for someone like me, but a lot of their marketing is around, hey, if you're in the next room on a conference call, you can have a virtual babysitter sit there with your kid and do homework with your child and help them for a couple hours while you're knocking out some work. So something like that, which we've just never really thought of babysitting as a virtual task, something that could be a virtual task, I think. And so I think it's one of those things that's going to stick around. I don't know how fast it'll take, but I think once it does, it just sounds like a cool idea.
Yeah, I think that's a hilarious example. As I was thinking about this question, I couldn't land on anything specific, but there's one right there. I think while I would expect a lot of change, I think what, and I'm sure you guys will probably agree, is that we're kind of tapping into troves of value that digital can provide. I think, I'm for one that is, let's get together face to face in the office and do stuff. And here we are in week 5 of quarantine. And I think what I found is that we're just as productive, if not more, in this form, right? I think the babysitter example is a great one, where it's, how do we do babysitting when we can't be face to face? And I think that question has been asked and answered over and over again, and even a lot of places outside of this room right here. So that's kind of what I imagine will happen, right? Is we'll leave this with a whole new understanding of how to do day-to-day stuff, right? Digital obviously is a huge reason why we're even able to stay productive, even in the cases that we are today. So I'm kind of holding out to see all the new ideas people have and kind of what sticks.
So I kind of want to build on that, Asa. That's a really good point. And I just want to come at it from a sort of a different angle of there's going to be new things that we come up with, but there's also going to be higher adoption of old things that maybe the adoption curve, those resistors or those late adopters. I'm interestingly, I'm married to a stay-at-home mom of 14 years who's an early adopter. She was doing, grocery delivery the week it came out, and has all these productivity apps on her phone that I never even knew existed. And so pretty interesting. But I think that, you're seeing people being forced into adoption of technologies that they maybe otherwise would have never tried. And I think what's going to happen is it's like maybe you're reading a book in a dimly lit room and you don't think anything's wrong, and someone come and turns the lights on and you go, oh, wow, that's kind of nice. I think I'll keep the light on. And so I think a lot of people are going to continue to use those technologies as they discover how easy they are.
I have to agree with that, JD. I have a really hilarious example. I'm like the nerd in my friend group, and I'm always talking about the new emerging technologies, and I'm the early adapter. And I've been talking about extended reality for a while, and I'm like, this is it, guys. You guys got to pay attention to this. And everybody's like, yeah, in sci-fi land. But when everything changed and everybody couldn't go into stores more often, I had a number of my friends hit me up and say, I just decorated my entire room using augmented reality. I get it now, and I think for a lot of companies, they have to pay a lot more attention to some of those emerging technologies and make sure that they're not caught behind, because this wave, I think, is going to continue to be strong and fast, well beyond this work from home and this current period that we're in.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. If you think about it from the perspective of when quarantine is lifted and people start going back into stores and things like that, are we going to be as comfortable standing in line 12 deep, maybe 6 inches apart from somebody in front of me? Or am I standing at a greater distance and now I'm not willing to go into the store during busy hours and things like that? How does a grocery store make up for an impulse buy that I would have made in line because now I'm ordering online or through curbside pickup or things like that? I think the baseline or the table stakes are now raised. People are used to these technologies, or they will become used to them if they aren't already. And how do you come up with what's next? I think going backwards actually may make a company look like they don't understand, they don't care about their customers, they're not taking safety as seriously as they possibly should. And these are the things that are now expected from customers. So what's coming up next? What's going to happen next, right? What's the next new technology that's coming in to make things like that easier? It'll be really interesting and exciting to see what that's going to look like.
Yeah, I receive a lot of emails talking about telemedicine. So some of the medics come to me is that you can schedule an appointment to do telemedicine. So telemedicine is not a new idea. It's in the past 10, 20 years is more of the B2B, so that another hospital can do some peer review, that kind of things. So now it's come to B2C. So I don't know who has any experience on this to see how's that going, but definitely it's especially for talking about pandemic quarantine. This is definitely one of the solution for people who have chronic diseases.
Yeah, this is Swami here. I can certainly speak to telemedicine with my own spouse being a physician. I mean, as you've probably, I don't know how many of you have noticed, but typically telemedicine used to be pretty tightly controlled by the states. But in this particular situation, all the states have gone about removing all their restrictions and regulations to make it easy for telemedicine providers, no matter where they are in the country, to be able to help patients in their state. So that, in fact, we also work with a company that does physician staffing and things like that. And right now they're, and healthcare staffing and their whole business model, I mean, there's a significant amount of change because now there's a high demand for physicians in certain areas that are very badly impacted by COVID, right? And they need healthcare workers there. And but there's now more opportunities to bring people in from other parts of the country to support that, right? But even within hospitals where we've seen COVID impacts, right, or where they have a lot of patients with the COVID disease, they're leveraging telemedicine so that providers don't have to necessarily be physically in the presence of the patients that they're trying to treat. So even within the same facility, you have a physician sitting in their office room and a patient in their bed interacting through telemedicine, right? So there's a significant amount of, I think as JD mentioned, right, the laggards, I mean, it's suddenly changing. It's accelerating forward like anything, right? And will patients want to go back to a world where they didn't have this kind of easy access to telemedicine, right? It's probably one of those things that's definitely here to stick.
Isn't this going to drive the need for to track new customer journeys, right? To gain these new insights, if they're adopting new technologies, they're adopting them at rapid pace, they're accelerating your digital transformations. Do you guys see that there's going to be a need to remap the journeys to find the new insights to where they build the new experiences based on that?
I wonder if that, I mean, that's a really interesting question. Because I'll give you a funny story. Just telemedicine, so just this past week, just because of trying to maintain good social distancing, I was forced into something that a lot of people probably already are, which is I did my Walgreens prescription through the app and did the drive-through and all that kind of stuff, like a lot of people are doing that, right? But I give you that particular example because, it probably relates to the telemedicine type of thing too, right? Going back to adoption of how many people don't do telemedicine because they just don't know about it or don't think about it as a thing that they could do, right? So, Kim, to answer your question, why I actually think it's kind of a funny question because obviously, doing experience design, we're always dreaming up the best possible ways to do everything, right? And then we launch it into market and then it's like, why isn't anyone doing it? And then we have to market it and all this kind of stuff, try to get people over these hurdles of adoption and they get there, right? But really what I think may happen is certainly we'll look at new journeys, but I think what we'll see is we'll start to see those archetypes starting to shift from one type of journey to another, right? We're going to see more people relying on telemedicine as they get a chance to try it and realize that it's way more effective than trying to get to the doctor's office, leave, like whatever it is that's causing you problems in the other journey. Yeah. All of it, the light going on, right? Oh, well, I could do it this way and it's way easier. So I think we'll see a lot more change in that from that view.
And there's a question out there. Do we think customer expectations will remain at these levels after the crisis? And can companies afford financially in certain cases to continue to provide this? I think that's from Pilar.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question to think about, right? So you can use the curbside pickup example that we've been using for a number of different cases or a number of different questions already. I worked with a client a few years ago that was introducing that for their model. And for them, it was one of those, our competitors are doing it, so we need to get into that space because we understand that's maybe where customers are moving. But they were losing money on every order that was going through that process, right? So thinking about it financially, it'll be interesting. I think some of these things will become expected, like I was saying earlier, around the customers expect to have that option. How many of them will use it? It's probably a greater percentage than was using it before, but it'll force companies to be a little bit more innovative to think about, well, if this is really expensive for us to deliver, how do we make it more affordable for us in order to make it profitable? How do we make sure that we include something, or do we tier customers in a certain way that if you've ordered X number of times, it becomes cheaper? If this is your first one, maybe we give you a discount. If you order once a month, maybe you pay a little bit more for the service, things like that. I think they'll get a little bit more creative on how they can at least recover some of their losses in that perspective. And they'll also start to think through different ways of for curbside pickup, again, picking those orders or batching them together, delivering them, things like that, right? Do they go the Amazon route, or where Amazon seems like it might be heading around? You get one day, this is, we'll drop everything off to you that one day, your Prime Day, something like that, where it's their way of kind of managing some of those costs. And I think that's going to be the flip side of the coin to the struggle today is, how do we implement something and make it last and keep our costs low? And then tomorrow is going to be, okay, now our customers expect this. How do we make it sustainable for us in the long run?
Mm. And hey, quick shout out for those listening in. If you guys have any questions, pop them in the Q&A and we'll hit them in these last 10 minutes. And as we're waiting for more of those to come in, I did want to also, on that, the point about financially feasible, we were talking earlier about how interesting it is and how lovely it is that some of these companies are doing things that are not necessarily the ROI is not revenue right now. They are companies that are making sanitizer and donating it or selling it. That we talked about Scofflaw and the Old Fourth Ward Brewery, which is, you know, such a cool switch. And there's so many other companies out there who are sort of revamping their products and services to manufacture goods for healthcare. And Swami, to your point about there's some doctors who need to be in person, there are hotel chains who are doing reduced, really reduced or free stay for hospital workers. And so we were talking earlier about how lovely it has been to see some of these, you know, companies doing things with empathy for the community and doing things that are really just giving back in the short term.
There was a great example I read last night. Hallmark gave away like 4 million cards so that people could say thank you to healthcare workers.
Oh, that's so lovely.
Love that.
And
So
the other, no, go for it, JD.
Oh, I was gonna say one of those examples that I was gonna talk about earlier at some point, this seems like a good chance, was the Home Depot, right? And we talked about when we prepared for this about how some values had changed and how, you know, 30, 40 years ago in the 80s and 90s, it was all about, you know, shareholder value and equity and those types of things. And you've seen with sort of this next generation come along more of a value system that's based around what's your purpose and what are you trying to do in the community. And when you see what Home Depot, their approach to this has been more based around stakeholder groups like customers and their employees and the community. And it just kind of, and for it to come out that quickly and organically, it kind of just shows you that that was their mindset. It's not a strategy they just came up with on the fly. And, but, you know, some of these benefits like 80 extra hours of paid time off for employees, 160 hours if they're over 65, canceling spring promotions to drive down traffic. You know, I don't know if all of those types of things are sustainable, but will be interesting to see from an employee expectation if some of these new benefits and things we're seeing become an expectation, you know, moving forward as well.
So it's interesting that you bring that up, because one of the challenges that companies have been talking about for feels like at least the last decade now is how do you engage with millennials and sustain millennials as that group that's going to have the most disposable income coming up pretty soon here, and then, you know, Gen Z after that. If some of the things that they've cared about and we've learned that they care about is experiences and what companies stand for and things like that, this is an excellent opportunity for companies to show who they are, what they stand for, what they care for, and possibly, you know, shifting from a shareholder value model to a stakeholder value model of we are members of the community. We do care about the people that work with us and for us. We do care about our customers and things like that. And putting that together to say this is, in the toughest of times, this is who we are and this is who we became and this is who we plan to be tomorrow.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that. I think there's been some things that were the prequel to this. Like I can call out Simon Sinek's Infinite Game, which calls to that upgrade in mentality. And I think what we really are seeing, and what I'm starting to see early signs of with my clients, is that this is really causing an upgrade to their corporate social responsibility.
Oh, hey, Marcus, go back off mute.
Oh, my thumb hit mute really quickly there. No, I think this is causing companies to have a much needed upgrade to their corporate social responsibility approach. I think that they are looking at it through a different lens. I think that some of those different data points that they might have said, hey, you know, this might not be really something that we can tackle. They're now saying we have to tackle it and it has to stay. I'm already seeing signs of that where I've seen organizations' corporate responsibility, social responsibility approach or strategy becoming something that is a part of the organization and weaving that into the different business. So I'm really excited about how this will change organizations and mature them overall.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you guys were telling me earlier about another one that you'd found, which was that like just driving around town, seeing the public signs, like thanking your employees, and the UPS campaign, the thanks for delivering, like things like that are showing that you really care about your employee base as part of your social responsibility. It's really inspiring. And I guess in our last few minutes, we have one more question I want to hit, but Are there any other favorite examples that you guys have seen of cool shifts of products, services, policies during this time?
I'll throw one out. I had forgotten about this, but I thought it was pretty cool. So Amazon, and it was something very simple, right? It was like when you pick your shipping options, and it was again like a light had been shined. Oh, that can work. Normally you're picking you're paying more and more for like faster and faster shipping. Well, they added a pay less, or actually what it was, get a free movie on Prime or something like that if we can deliver this to you late. Right. And so it was specifically, again, worded around, so we can give emergency supplies faster, or, give us a logistical break here. Right. So I thought that was a nice little thing. And of course, I did that. I didn't need it tomorrow, and it was fine for a week and a half wait. Right. So I thought that was
I'm really impressed with the, how do you pronounce the name? The Castellucci restaurant group. I don't know if you know them. They're that Iberian Pig and Sugos.
Yeah.
I tell you, they have really been a leader and a star in transforming their business and keeping the customer in mind first, right? And doing it in a really classy way. They're partnering with Emory Hospital, and for every meal that you buy from their restaurant group, they're matching the donation and supplying food to the workers, which is really cool. And they're family meal ordering online, and you drive up, they see your car tag number, and they load it in your trunk, so it's contactless. And I'm really impressed with the transformation their company has made so not only survive, but positive influence on the customers.
That's pretty cool. Yeah, one of the examples here is a local company up in Alpharetta that used to make bibs for dentists' offices. Adhesive bibs, and they looked at the problem with the limited number of masks that physicians and then healthcare workers were dealing with. So they came up with a redesign to their product, which could be worn as a bib kind of on top of your mask and your regular clothing. So it extends the life of your mask, right? I mean, very simple redesign, and a way that they changed their product, but it was something that I think that that our hospitals really, really needed this time.
I love that one. There was one other funny one, and then I'll answer the question. We'll round up. But on a cheerful note, there were a couple articles around about Calendly being used to schedule their local in Atlanta. It's a really cool way to schedule events. People were using them, and there was a company called Goat2Meeting to schedule like live farm animals to come into these Zoom calls to make people feel more cheerful and like you're out of. So talk about like a segment change, like new use case for a product. But inspired by that, we asked a local company here, or a local organization that saves llamas and alpacas, to do that with one of our meetings, and we wired them in, and it was super fun, and cheered us all up. So if anyone needs to do something
actually,
creative.
I was going to adding to that. I think to some of the points that were mentioned earlier, right? In addition to digital transformation being accelerated, right? I mean, as we talked about earlier, there's an acceleration to be purpose focused, right, as organizations, and really be giving back. But one other thing that I think, as you mentioned with this example, Lydia, is that companies need to really be thinking about the mental health of their team members, and also even when people come into a store, or when their employees or associates come into contact with customers. I mean, you got to think about mental health from all aspects, right? So I expect that organizations will be taking that a lot more seriously going forward.
Yeah, that's lovely. That would be a great one to keep on through recovery. All right, we have one question, and then we'll end on a final note. And the question is, Forrester, in one of their COVID-19 studies, concluded about work from home employee efficiency, that for employees who worked well from home, like pre-quarantine, going 100% remote made them so much more productive. But there was another group who typically don't work from home, and they tended to become disengaged. And I think, remember, like, especially if not like given the right training and mechanisms to stay in touch. So thinking about how you apply that to CX, are we at risk of alienating some of our customers if we force everyone to like be completely remote and do all things digital? So I would like to pose that question to the group and kind of also end on, with that in mind, how would you recommend people staying in touch with what customers want and need coming into recovery, to understand if what you're doing is alienating customers, or how do you do things in such a way that you're supporting like the whole base as you're going through recovery?
I don't know if anybody else wanted to go first, but if I may jump in here, again with the U-Haul example, right? One of the challenges that they found was that when they had, and they've been doing this transition to having work from home agents for a while, right? But because that also gives you the opportunity to have a lot of part-time call center or agents, it seemed like a good thing to say, hey, I can have 50 agents, each doing 2, 3, 4-hour shifts. But what they found was that if the managers of these team members did not have the ability to engage with them one-on-one, and when you scale that number beyond a certain size, it just broke down, right? So when you think about engagement, when you think about people working remotely, you need to be able to give them the ability to have that connection with the rest of their team members. And I think, as Marcus mentioned earlier, a lot of new technology is going to evolve in this space for sure.
Can I jump in on that and be a little controversial and maybe challenge the premise a little bit? So just looking at the question and thinking about it, a lot of times when you look at employees and whether or not we're coming to work or staying home, like in this situation right now, we're forced into one or the other. It's an either or choice. And if you have a work from home culture in your office, you can go to the office, but if no one else is there, you're not really collaborating. You're not really getting what you need if you're that type of person who needs to be. So, however, when we're talking about customers, normally the digital channels become another arrow in the quiver. So if I don't want to, pick up my groceries, order them online and pick them up in a parking spot, I can still go in the store. And so I think a lot of times the new experiences will cater to a different group without leaving out the previous group. So I would say, no, there's not really a risk of that, because it's not like you're eliminating the other channel. Whereas in a work from home culture, like what we're going through now, we're being forced into a scenario where some people may not be used to or know how to deal with or thrive in. So I don't know, that's my sort of challenging any thoughts on that?
I think that's an interesting point. And if you think about it, regardless of what you do from an experience design perspective, there's going to be a group that feels the change in a negative way. And whether that's disengagement or no longer agreeing with the company, no longer connecting with them and seeing eye to eye with the vision, whatever that is, I think there's always a risk of something like that coming up. I think, JD, to your point of, if you force customers down a certain channel, you're likely going to lose more. If you offer them another avenue of engaging with you, then you may not lose any, you may gain more. And I think part of that is, one, creating those channels and providing customers the opportunity to engage in the way that they want to engage. But then also from an organizational perspective, there may be a situation where you want to push certain customers into certain channels or certain methods of engagement because it makes the most sense for you, right? If you've got high value customers, you may want to provide more white glove service, things like that. But I think there's a concept of both sides of create the technology or create avenues, channels, media that customers can use and allow them to choose which ones are most valuable to them. And then from the backside, from the organization perspective, think about long-term, this is where we want to go, this is where we want to invest, and this is how we want to engage with subsets within each one of those channels.
Chime in real quick on the employee side of that, because I think that's a pretty important part. And I guess the only thing I would say there is that it's an important bit of data from Forrester to tell us that, right? I think what it means is, yeah, I mean, we know that employee engagement is a huge portion of our customer experience. So I don't know what to do there. All I would say is that those employees that you've identified don't really work from home, or they need to be in the store or whatever. It's a good opportunity to get creative about how you keep them engaged, right? Do you have video calls with them in the morning? How are you replacing the normal interaction that you have with them so they make sure that they feel taken care of and can continue to deliver that service. So I'll leave you with that.
Awesome. Great, guys. I think that was a super helpful note to end on, and we're a couple minutes over. So I'm going to wrap us up, but I thought that was a great last question for us to answer. So thank you guys so much for being speakers with us today. I'm really excited that we're able to offer something to everyone virtually. Speaking of what you were just saying, Asa, how do we support people who are remote right now? So thank you guys for all listening in. This will be posted for future people to watch, and so we'll send that link out. So if you, as you were listening, thought this could be useful to provide to someone else to have a listen, then we'll have that link out and you can send it on. And otherwise, we look forward to potentially having you with us in our next one. So thank you everyone who's on this for joining, and thanks again everyone for being a speaker with us today.
Bye all. See ya.
Thank you, Lydia.
Thank you.
Bye.